What's going on, Giants and Jets fans? Welcome to the latest episode of our Talk is Cheap Giants and Jets podcast. It is Wednesday evening, July the 31st, right now. Daryl Slater here, Andy Vasquez, our Jets reporter, with me. So we'll talk Jets, we'll talk Giants. A week into training camp. Both teams began practice 1 week ago. Giants have had 6 practices. They were off today. Andy can fill me in on the particulars of how many practices the Jets have had. They did practice today, and so seems like a good point here. 2 padded practices in for the Giants. I think 2 for the Jets, but to kind of take stock of where things are at. Better than kind of doing one before camp and speculating, blah, blah, blah. Kind of have an idea of where things are falling for these two teams. So we'll take it segment by segment here. I think we can talk Giant offense, Giant defense, Jet defense, something like that. Um, but first, let's start at the top here with the Hard Knocks finale last night, fifth and final episode. Pretty interesting series overall, I'd say. Last night's episode, not so much, but certainly some things to be drawn from that. And that, look, the Giants wanted to draft Kamari Lassiter or Kool-Aid McKinstry in the second round, cornerback. They didn't want Cordell Flott playing opposite Deontay Banks, but couldn't do it. Couldn't pick them, either of those guys, because they didn't pick the 47 because they traded away 39 for Brian Burns. And more pressure on Brian Burns, as I wrote for this morning. And I think also, as we bring in Andy here, the really interesting part where Joe Douglas wanted to trade up, and Joe Shane basically said no right away, probably for Rome Odunze, right, Andy?
Yeah, I think him or maybe even for neighbors, at that point, because he was there, obviously, when the Giants were on the clock. So um, I think like they clearly wanted one of those top receivers. You could see, kind of feel like the air go out of the room. But even when you watch the Jets did their own documentary after the draft, and even with editing, you could see like it was a letdown. Um, and this was just further confirmation of that. And Uh, again, I don't think there's anything wrong with the way it happened. You got to have a partner if you want to trade up. But yeah, I mean, they clearly wanted to get one of those top tier guys, and it just wasn't in the cards.
Yeah, so we can address where the Jets stand at receiver other than Garrett Wilson right now, or tonight, obviously, in a minute. But but of course, that how it went was that the Jets did pick Malik Neighbors at 6. They obviously tried to trade up for Drake May. You saw that in Hard Knocks, along with all the Saquon Barkley drama, that they were very willing to divorce Daniel Jones. And the Jets, of course, traded back from 10 to 11. The Vikings move up one spot. They get JJ McCarthy at 10. The Giants had passed on him, passed on Michael Penix. We'll see how that works out. And they get Olu Fashanu, the Jets do the tackle at 11. So that's kind of the summation of the latest on Hard Knocks. We don't need to go all the way back to all the Barkley stuff. You all know how that unfolded. But overall pretty interesting. Look, I mean, it's pretty revealing. One of the other writers who covers the Giants, Dan Duggan, mentioned today on Twitter he doesn't think any team will ever volunteer to do this again, and I agree. I mean, it is much easier to pad with fluff in the training camp Hard Knocks, right? I mean, it can be all this human interest BS. Man, the off-season Hard Knocks is pure behind-the-scenes decision making. And yeah, they did gloss over some stuff, certainly. And I'm sure the Giants were able to get some stuff taken out, but it was pretty meaty overall. I thought it was an interesting watch. So with that, we pivot to where we're at here in training camp. And we're going to start. Look, I think the most interesting of the 4 units, Giant offense, Jet offense, Giant defense, Jet defense, is the Giant offense. And okay, look, I mean, yesterday the Giants offense was an absolute disaster. Disaster. It one day of training camp practice. We get it. We get it. But I think it's an accumulation of everything here. This is an offense that has been pretty bad for the entire time the Giants have been bad. They did some good things in 2022. They were a disaster last season amid quarterback and O-line attrition. All right. Big time pressure on Brian Dable this year. We know that. He's going to call the plays, surely, not official, but we know that. Big time pressure on Daniel Jones. They upgraded the line, or so they say. They got a weapon in Malik Neighbors. The skill position guys aren't perfect. Again, like no more excuses here. This is Joe Shane's roster. Okay. No more Gettleman excuses. We all know Gettleman did a terrible job. He's gone. He's long gone. His players are gone. Okay. So, time to produce, especially on offense. And that's why practices like yesterday, I think people look at that and see, all right, this is troubling. I understand the quarterback hadn't practiced fully since early November before tearing his ACL, but Just a sloppy situation offensively for the Giants. And look, I think Neighbors will be fine. They're going to lean a ton on him. But as we do this, we'll try not to make this belabor this whole thing here, make this go on forever. But really, the quick hits on this Giant offense right now are this: separate from Jones. Okay, so forget about Drew Lock getting first team reps. Okay, he stinks. He stinks. He's not getting first team reps. Okay, let's start with okay, the weapons. You kind of know what it is right now. There's a tight end battle. Theo Johnson, Daniel Bellinger. I wouldn't be surprised if Johnson, now that he's back at practice after the hip issue, is the number one tight end. You know what the receivers are. It's really Slayton versus Hyatt for that other outside spot. They're going to lean a ton on Neighbors. They need Wan'Dale Robinson to be better. That's a Joe Shane draft pick. Okay, he's got to produce. Their line is scrambling because Joe Shane whiffed on Evan Neal and he whiffed on Josh Azudu. Okay. So, and he may have whiffed on John Michael Schmitz, the center. We'll see. It's in year two now. So, but now that they've signed Greg Van Roten, the former Jet starter, who was actually really good last year, he's 34 years old and coming off a good year as a right guard in Vegas. He'll probably be their right guard. John Runyon switches to left guard where he's apparently comfortable. He's been playing right guard. They got Jermaine Illuminor at right tackle. He was good last year in Vegas as a right tackle under the, Carmen Bracilla, the O-line coach now. So I mean, look, let's believe it when we see it with this giant offensive line. Andrew Thomas, you know where you're getting there. But other than that, right? What are you getting from Runyon at left guard? He's played, I think, one snap at left guard since week 6 of 2022. Okay. What are you getting from Schmitz at center? Can he stay healthy? How much Van Roten have left at right guard? May have remaining, in the tank. And then what do you make of Illuminor? He'll be an upgrade from Neal, but this is a low bar. That's a really low bar. So that's where this thing stands for this giant offense. And I think that's where a lot of people are concerned. It's not just that they don't have a ton of weapons other than Malik Neighbors. So it is a pretty good receiver group. Like, can they protect Daniel Jones? So that's where I think there's some frustration among Giant fans. And I think people are a little bit delusional if they're just poo-pooing, oh, it's just one practice. I can guarantee you Brian Dable didn't go into his office and say, oh, just one practice. Let's go to Pizza Hut, after practice. Come on. No, he wasn't happy with that. So speaking of frustration, Andy, what about things in Florham Park? A little bit of Aaron Rodgers, and you kind of like to see it getting feisty with not being pleased about some of the mistakes offensively.
Yeah, I think it's been interesting, and yeah, I mean, we'll touch on that in a second. Just to quickly uh, go back through some of the points you made. I think if you look at the Jets' Hard Knocks last year compared to the Giants, I mean, at one point there was an Ed Sheeran hype song that was like basically a 90-second Aaron Rodgers tourism video. I mean, it
Pure
was like if
fluff.
you were if you're commissioning like a video to hype your own hype video and you had $100 million to do it, it would end up like that. So and there was more news in every single episode of this Giants thing than there was in the entire 5 episodes of the Jets Hard Knocks. So yeah, that it's you can control it because there's so much that happens over the course of a camp. Way better if you're a team with the right of refusal and stuff. And there's only so much you can refuse because everything that happens is kind of behind the scenes and meaningful. So yeah, I agree. I think or that's the one that everybody will avoid if they keep it. But I would not want to do that if I were a team because it's not beneficial. It just doesn't. I don't see how it's beneficial in any way, and I'm surprised it even happened. Given how much juicy stuff there was, and then yeah, with training camp practice in July, it's easy. And I say this like we all overreact to everything, and it's easy to poo poo stuff and be like this shouldn't this it's July. Like, does this really matter? And I say that frequently, but I think as someone who has covered a lot of bad teams in training camp and seen a lot of terrible training camp practices, it's hard to tell, like right now, how if the Jets offense is in trouble or not, because there's a lot of new pieces. They're playing against a really good defense. Anyone who's making definitive claims about the Jets offense based on some of their struggles over the last 3 days does not know what they're talking about, good or bad. Just like today, they had a great day in their third padded practice, but it was like a light a lighter day, but still great day. If you're gonna go that way too, you don't know what you're talking about. But you can tell if a team is really bad, I think, at this stage, because it just becomes this comedy of errors, and the backups start beating the starters, and just it's a mess. And I think that's kind of what you were talking about. It reminds me of what I saw with the Jets in 2020, and when you knew like a weekend into whatever, that it wasn't a normal camp, but you knew like after 2 days of watching them practice that it was going to be terrible. But I think you can kind of pick that up right, and like you as a coach, especially in the situation the Giants are in, you got to fix that quickly because the players know it too, and it starts to seep into them, and that's how you have a nightmare year. So with the Jets, yeah, I think the frustration is good. I mean, like I've watched so many practices where the Jets kind of went through the motions, and now the attention to detail, it's even higher this year with Tyron Smith there in terms of like there's all these guys out, younger guys out in the field who really obviously respect Rodgers and really respect Smith um, in a way that's like almost even more than Rodgers because he's so like revered around the league and everybody knows like how much of a master of his craft that he is. And it's just if these guys are out there giving their all, how can these younger guys not show up in practice with full intensity? And that's like the biggest thing I've noticed in terms of the last 2 years with the Jets is like the intensity in training camp was several notches higher last year. Same with OTAs. And this year, OTAs were several notches higher than they were last year. Training camp is the same. And I think the intensity is good. You can tell that this isn't like Garrett Wilson and Aaron Rodgers don't like each other. I've been highly critical of Rodgers and I have no problem criticizing him. But, look, and I think his teammates roll their eyes at some of the stuff he says. I think he miffed some of them last year when he was getting all the attention and demanding all the attention and making it about him. But it's still Aaron Rodgers, still a guy that they've looked up to their entire careers, a guy they played at Madden with when they were, a kid, and now uh, by all accounts, he's a good teammate. He takes the time to talk to these guys, get to know them, treats them, with respect. And you see him like yelling at a guy or like Joe Tippmann struggling with the snaps and Rodgers is letting him know. But then they're having like a 2 minute conversation off to the side, and it's not like Rodgers is brushing him off. Like, he's talking to him. Later in practice when other stuff is going on, it's not like he's making a show of it. So yeah, I mean, Rodgers is a complicated figure in terms of like he is. He says a lot of stuff that everybody's like, "What the hell was that?" And I think you can still be that, but he gets like a lot of leeway with his teammates because of what I just said, because he treats them, well, like humans, and is trying to make them better. And they said it today about Joe Tippmann. At least like I think different guys react well to certain things, and you can't yell at some guys for like Tippmann. He's going to have a long career in this league. He's tough, and I can ride his ass for not snapping the ball because he should be snapping the ball to me. That's like the very basic stuff. So yeah, I think everything we've seen in terms of the frustration is not overly like. Is it great that the quarterback is kind of showing up some of these guys? I don't know. I mean, like again, he's trying to say like this isn't good enough. So I don't think I wouldn't view it as showing it up or showing other guys up. I think it's like I think there it's a back and forth, and the fact that I think it's more encouraging that Garrett Wilson feels like he can go back and forth with Aaron Rodgers than like not say that he didn't like the way or that he didn't like that he didn't see him open or whatever. I think that's a good sign for this team going forward because like when things do go wrong, they're not just going to shut down and not talk to each other and play the blame game, at least not right away.
Yeah,
So yeah, that's
for
that's my
sure.
take. I
Yeah.
think
Yeah, I think that, Wilson's fiery. Garrett Wilson's fiery dude. We saw it. Rodgers fiery. So let's see what happens when some adversity hits. I think it'll be a fascinating to watch. Obviously, you have a lot of alpha personalities, people who are not afraid to speak their mind, and that could certainly always be good to air grievances. But we'll see how that plays out. And in terms of like I touched on a little bit with the Giant offense, that the durability of Evan Neal, it's been a major issue, and it's one of the reasons why he's not cannot be their left tackle or their right tackle rather to start. He can't be a starter, period. Okay, so they're moving on from him. But speaking of durability, Jet offense wise, Mike. So what's the latest here on Mike Williams? Because obviously we mentioned they didn't get a receiver in the draft, so they really need Mike Williams. What's the latest on his deal coming off the ACL surgery? He's similar timeline to where Daniel Jones is on that. And the other guy who's not practicing, who's notable, is Morgan Moses with the pec. Looks like Elijah Vera Tucker's back, right, with the coming off the Achilles. So give me the rundown there on those, I guess those three key guys like Mike Williams, Vera Tucker, Morgan Moses.
Yeah, Mike Williams. Yeah, and we'll get over to the offensive line because I think that's really the most important thing with this offense. But with Williams, he tore his ACL in late uh, September. So the Jets have said all along he's on a similar timeline. Brees Hall last year. Brees did tear his ACL like a month later than Mike Williams did the year before, but Brees Hall got back on the field about mid-August. I think he started practicing fully before the Giants game last year. So I think you're going to see the same thing. Couple weeks. Within the next 2 weeks, he'll get activated and kind of ramp up, get some work in team drills. And I think like week one, he'll probably be on like 60 to 70% of whatever they envision his final workload being. And really with the Jets, like he's good. This is a guy who has been hurt. They need to manage that, and they need him available late in the season at his best when they've struggled to score because he's a guy who makes tough catches in tight spaces and has had success scoring and getting the ball across the line in the red zone. So I think that's got to be kind of how they manage him, and I think it's how they will. But it does make their depth at wide receiver very tenuous because they lost Xavier Gibson with Robert Saleh isn't giving us much detail on injuries these days, so it's a lower body injury, but he'll be out, this week and perhaps next week. So it's interesting. They're going to have to if they have any injury issues at wide receiver beyond what they already have. It's going to be really tough for them. And then on the offensive line, Morgan Moses is coming off. I think it was a rotator cuff surgery. Um, After playing with that last year, they said he'd be ready for the start of camp. He said he'd be ready for the start of camp. He's out there. He's doing individuals. There is contact. He's doing stuff. I watched him pretty closely today, but still no team drills. The Jets aren't like opening this up as a competition though, which I find very interesting and also telling with the whole thing we talked about. With them, they were clearly trying to trade up at number six for an impact guy right now, and when they didn't, they're fine to kind of. That's why I don't think they were trading up for Latham because him and Fashanu were rated pretty similarly. Joel Alt was above both of them. I think they saw if they got an offensive lineman at that stage in the draft, 10 or 11, that's why they traded down. They were happy to kind of let him ride the bench and learn his first year. And now here we are. Fashanu's getting reps at left tackle on Tyron Smith's off day. And we're seeing a difference. We're not seeing him back up Morgan Moses. And really, we're not seeing him compete for that job. The job is being handed to Moses. And that's fine. But if he's got to be healthy and stay on the field. And I think like I would expect him. He looks like he'll probably be at practice later in the week. Judging they practice Friday and Saturday, I'd expect him to make his debut in team drills then. But if he doesn't, then they're going to have to start considering like letting Fashanu compete for the job because it's we're getting into there's only 3 weeks of real prep left now with at that point with the preseason openers next week. So yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, Barrett Tucker, that's good news. He was supposed to come back this week, came back early last week. He's on a snap count, but he looks very good. He's looked very good since May, in terms of doing stuff off to the side, a lot of sprinting, a lot of side to side stuff. And after tearing his Achilles in October, it's pretty impressive. So yeah, he looks like he's back to his normal self. And this year will be different because they'll keep him at right guard instead of moving him around no matter what. They've said that even if there's an injury issue. So I think they're hoping that'll help him stay on the field after two freakish injuries ended his season in October in Denver. And I would also say, even though Denver's coming here this year at the end of September, I don't know if I were Tucker, I might just sit that one out because it's just been crazy how both of those seasons have ended against the Broncos, and then to see them, even though it's not in Denver, on the schedule again. I know I'm half kidding, but like, could you imagine if that happened again against them? So
Sure.
it's kind of
Yeah.
like it's a weird thing, and I'm sure he'll be. I mean, all Jets fan will be a little nervous heading into that game.
Yeah, and durability issues for sure on the offensive line. The age concerns, just like last year. I think they're in better shape, obviously, than going in with Dwayne Brown. We all know the nightmare that caused in the opener
Yeah.
and the Achilles and all that. But they're depending on a couple old tackles, and so we'll see how that goes. And you alluded to a Jet preseason opener at home next Saturday, August the 10th at noon against the Commanders. The Giants Thursday night, also at home on the 8th of August here coming up in a week or so against the Detroit Lions, and then joint practice Monday, Tuesday for the Giants with the Lions. When do the Jets have joint practices with Commanders, right? One
Yeah, they have
couple.
joint practices with the Commanders, and then they head to Carolina for a Thursday joint practice with the Panthers before a Saturday night game.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
that'll be
All
a
right.
good time. And then yeah,
So
they also have a joint practice with the Giants. So three joint practices,
yeah,
not no dual
you,
sessions with either
you're
team.
seeing teams do that more. Starters are going to get a lot of work in the joint practice, not so much in the game. So the games will be even more relevant than they usually are, at least in those cases when there's joint practices preceding them. And just kind of moving over to the defense right now, the Giant defense. I think the biggest issue here for Shane Bowen is got to be slot corner. That's the biggest question remaining, and also number two corner, right? So can Deontay Banks be a number one corner? We don't know, but he's their number one corner. Cordell Flott has not been good in camp so far. It's early, but he has not been good. You can see why they wanted Lassiter or McKinstry to be the corner there. But look, again, the Burns trade pinched their assets, and so at the risk of making that phrase sound a little a little risque, but they look, I mean, slot corner last year, he has just not really been consistent in camp so far. The slot cornerback job between the third round rookie Drew Phillips and Nick McLeod, who's a really versatile, gritty, undrafted player, who's been in the league for, 3, 4 years or so. And so I think Phillips probably wins that job. They've been playing Isaiah Simmons, who's got a linebacker strong safety body as a slot corner quite a bit as a sub package guy. That'll be a really interesting role to see. That's something to keep an eye on. I'll have something on that tomorrow. I'm going to write it here when we hop off on Isaiah Simmons talking about his role. And so, excuse me. And as far as the other issues in this defense and the other questions in the position battles, it is what it's the battles that we said were going to be the case going in. I mean, we talked about the offense for the Giants, right? I mean, the offensive line's kind of sort of sorted itself out or will. We talked about the number two outside receiver. The tight end situation was always going to be a battle. The number two or the slot cornerback rather job, the nickel. And then what about free safety? Well, they drafted Tyler Nubin at 47. They said, "Oh, he's a starter." You saw it on Hard Knocks, right in the draft room, right? He'll start. He'll start immediately. Well, he's had a calf injury, hasn't practiced since day one of camp. So he has been a notable injury in camp, as has Evan Neal, who hasn't practiced at all, as has John Michael Schmitz, who got hurt on day 3 last Friday. So Nubin has been pretty much completely absent, and Dane Belton, who is not exactly impressed through a couple of years. Well, certainly when given the chance after Xavier McKinney's hand injury a couple of years ago, Dane Belton's gotten all those reps as free safety, and he has played with really renewed confidence or just a significant amount of confidence and played well. And he said before, well, early in camp, I guess I think I talked to him day one, and he said, I'm going for this job. This is the job. I'm looking at it as my job to win. I think at that point, Nubin had just gotten hurt that day, but we didn't really know that he was going to be out for this long. And so Belton has seized that job. He's run with it, and that's they're going to play a lot more zone coverage than they did under Wink Martindale, where they played a lot of man, they blitzed a ton. It's going to flip flop. They're not going to blitz as much. They're going to play more zone under Shane Bowen, and it's a super green secondary, as we said a million times going back to the spring. But that's where they're at. I think that those are the notable position battles for this Giant defense, and obviously, they need Burns to be just and Thibodeau to be monsters as part of a four-man rush with not blitzing a lot. They need, and you know what you're getting from Dexter Lawrence. Okay. You know what you're getting from Dexter Lawrence. You know what you're getting from Andrew Thomas. Okay. But that's fine. But there's a whole lot of other players in the field. And so that's where, the questions come in for both of these fronts, the defensive front and the offensive line for the Giants. And so we didn't really touch on any position battles on the Jet offense. It doesn't sound like you really see any right now. So I know we were talked in the spring a little bit about maybe a position battle Jet defense wise in the secondary. But break down real quick where the Jets defense is at. Obviously, elite players over there. And if where, if any, do you see any competition for spots?
Yeah, with the offense, I think the battles are the one I mentioned potentially if Morgan Moses doesn't get back, and then it's a backup running back that type of situation, fourth receiver. Um, you know, I think of Malachi Corley has stepped in since Xavier Gibson got hurt, and I thought there was always going to be a good chance that he would be the guy they featured more in the slot, and I think what he's done over the last few practices has enhanced that chance a lot. But the Jets also like to, at least try to make guys earn it or make it look like they're earning it after the Zach Wilson fiasco where they handed him the job and it obviously did not go well. So I think they'll at least start the season with those guys splitting time. But yeah, that's pretty much it on offense. Then on defense, again, it's pretty stacked. I mean, we know who the cornerbacks are. There was supposed to be a battle between Ashton Davis and Chuck Clark heading into the season at safety. It's pretty obvious that Chuck Clark is the guy, and it's going to be their strong safety. So alongside Tony Adams, who earned the job last year, and then uh, at linebacker, we know who the top guys are, and Quincy Williams has become one of the best in the league, which is pretty remarkable considering the Jets picked him up off of waivers a few years ago. Um, and that's been a great success story for them, and another example of Jeff Ulbrich just developing these guys. Did it with Bryce Huff as well, and another reason to feel really good about your defensive coordinator if you're the Jets, and if they have a big year, it's good to see him being around here next year. And yeah, and then on the defensive line, it's pretty standard. I mean, the big question right now, and it's flying under the radar because there hasn't been any movement, is Hassan Reddick, and
Oh
if
yeah. I
if he's
mean,
going to be back. And I mean, there's been so much going on with the Jets, but there's been no movement on this, and the whole thing is so strange because like they both sides have to get this done. How it even got to this point, it's just so typical Jets. Like how would you try to extend a guy and then you trade for him anyway, and then you're not after he turns down the extension, and you yeah, I just don't understand like the logic behind that and how it's kind of seems like a lot of people want to blame Reddick for kind of going back on his word, but I have teams go back on their word all the time. Teams always make these decisions for business. If I were Reddick, I wouldn't show up anywhere with a Jets logo if they don't guarantee my contract. And I would also want the raise that he deserves. Right now, he's paid like the 20th best edge rusher in the league at 14.25 million, or maybe it's 14.5. But either way, he's the 20th highest paid, and he's definitely a top 10 guy, probably a top 5 guy. And I think at the very least to get him up above 20 million and close to within $1 million of being a top 5 guy is not unreasonable. It's not something the Jets can't accommodate. It's something they should have expected that they had to do when they traded for him. And it surpasses understanding why it's not done other than you're talking about the Jets. So um, like if it gets done by the end of this week, I think it won't be a big deal because he's a pro, and I think he'll have enough time, enough you know practices, even with an acclimation period, to get in there and do something. But if it doesn't get done, and now we're at the point where it may not get done by the end of this week, it could turn into a classic Jets uh, crap show, but not the word crap, if you know what I mean. So
I think,
um,
yeah,
yeah,
it,
so I just it's just
wow,
mystifying how they keep getting to
it
these
is.
points. Like this should be simple stuff, and it never is with this team.
Never. And so I guess as we wind this down, we can bottom line it. We'll do another one of these after the first preseason game. So sometime in the early in the week that starts Monday, August the 12th, because again, the Giants on the 8th of August next Thursday, the opener, the Jets 2 days later. So as we head into the second week of camp, it's weird because they started camp on a Wednesday, but really the end of this first full week and then going into next week with the preseason openers, the two lingering questions and the two things the clock are ticking on are for the Jets, Hassan Reddick. That's I mean everything else is kind of going to settle and fizzle, settle in it. Rodgers and the feistiness and the position battles, it'll all work itself out. But the Reddick thing is lingering and the clock is ticking, as you said. With the Giants, the offense and its need to actually look not inept is lingering and the clock is ticking, especially with finding continuity on this offensive line. Brian Dable said he wanted to get his five set. And I mean, geez, come on. Like they just haven't been able to do it for various reasons. And maybe with Van Roten getting in there, they can finally get this five set, which would be Andrew Thomas, John Runyon, John Michael Schmitz, who's got a shoulder issue, so you got to get him back too. Greg Van Roten and Jermaine Illuminor. So there's not only getting Van Roten in there, but there's getting Schmitz back from his injury. Same shoulder as last year, cost him 3 games, different injury. So anyway, we don't know the full severity of the injury, but that's where things stand. That's the big thing for the Jets. That's the big thing for the Giants. And we'll leave it there and appreciate everyone joining us. Again, we'll do one of these early in the week of the 12th. That will have given us an opportunity to kind of digest the preseason opener, have a little bit more to talk about in terms of advancing some of these important storylines for these two teams. So we appreciate everybody listening. Thanks as always for reading NJ.com/Giants, NJ.com/Jets for all of our stuff. Be sure to rate, review, like, subscribe, all that good stuff on the places where you find your podcasts. And thanks again for reading. Thanks again for taking the time to listen. And we will be back with you guys exactly around the time that I just said. So everyone have a good rest of your week. And if you're going out to any of these remaining open training camp practices, stay hydrated, stay in the shade, and hope you guys get a few autographs and all that good stuff. So we'll talk to you all soon.